Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from ToHealth. My name is Laura, Commercial Director at ToHealth and also a physiologist by background. And today, in support of Stress Awareness Month and DNA Day, which is actually today, we're going to be combining these two topics to explore the stress-DNA connection and specifically the link between stress and our genetic makeup. So stress is something in life that we can't avoid, but did we actually know that it can impact genes and cause what we call epigenetic modifications? So today we're going to explore that link between stress and our DNA by taking a look at the impact that stress has on our health. And we'll do this by understanding what stress is, and not only what it actually is, but the types of stress and also the physiology of stress. And then we're going to have a bit of a throwback to GCSE and A-level biology and actually understand the basics of DNA and epigenetics so that we can understand how stress can impact our genes on a more molecular level. And then we'll conclude today's session by having a look at the strategies to mitigate the effect that stress has on us. So let's jump straight in and take a look at what stress is and how it can impact on our health. So stress, it's a term that we hear and that we use a lot, but by definition, what does it actually mean? Now, if you joined us back in February, you might remember that our medical director, Dr. Sadra, describes stress using the World Health Organization's definition as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain, and that's perhaps caused by a difficult situation. Now, stress is a natural human response whenever we perceive a challenge or a threat in our life, and everyone experiences stress to some degree. But it's the way that we respond to stress that makes a really big difference to our overall health and well-being. Now, generally speaking, there are three key types of stress that you can see on the screen there. So the first one is acute stress. Acute stress is generally fleeting, and it's something that many of us will experience throughout the day, from trying to catch the train or get to work on time, going into an exam, or even meeting a work deadline, or perhaps even before a presentation. And you might encounter this type of stress for a variety of reasons, but usually there's no lasting harm other than some short-term effects, which might be an increase in your heart rate. Maybe you're finding it harder to relax or it's impacting on your sleep. But generally speaking, this largely doesn't have any long-term impact. We then move on to looking at episodic acute stress. This is where you have constant episodes of acute stress, and people who have a busy work and or family life or can't quite get that balance between work and life generally fall into this category and might have some symptoms such as headaches or migraines and be more susceptible to coughs and colds and an increased risk of depression. And lastly, we have chronic stress. It's by far the most serious as it refers to a constant state of feeling pressured or overwhelmed over a long period of time. And the overexposure to the stress hormone cortisol can put you at an increase of health problems such as cardiovascular disease, mental ill health, chronic muscular tensions, and even irregular menstrual cycles, to name but a few. Now, there's an abundance of literature out there that's examined that there is a clear relationship between stress and disease pathogenesis. Research by the Harvard School of Public Health outlined that social and personal worry significantly increased the risk of coronary heart disease. And furthermore, three prospective studies outlined that over a 10-year period, cancer and cardiovascular disease deaths were caused more by stress than by smoking. And specifically, those individuals who were more stressed than their non-stress counterparts had a 40% higher death rate. So it's really important that we take a look at stress and recognise that it is purely, it's more than just psychological, and it can be explained through something called a general adaptation syndrome or a gas model. So let's have a look at the physiology of stress by exploring this gas model a little bit more. And this is a model which describes the process that your body goes through when you're exposed to any kind of stress, both positive and negative. And it has three distinct stages: an alarm stage, a resistance stage, and an exhaustion stage. Now, enduring stress has physical and mental effects on the body, and the more that your body goes through the stages of general adaptation, the greater the risk of long-lasting negative effects. So, by understanding gas, including how it's triggered, it can help you to reduce your stress and therefore your stress response. Now, the general adaptation syndrome was defined in the 1950s, and the first stage is what we call the alarm reaction stage. This is your body's natural response to stress, and you might often know it as being your fight or flight response. And many of us might notice that increase, like I mentioned earlier, in your heart rate or even your breathing rate, and potentially even a little bit of shaking or trembling. Phase two or stage two is the resistance stage of general adaptation syndrome. And that's when your body tries to repair itself after that initial shock of stress. If the stressful situation is no longer present and you can overcome the stress, then your heart rate and your blood pressure and all those other physiological changes will start to return to your pre-stress state during this stage. However, if that stressful situation continues for a long time or you don't resolve the stress, your body will never receive a clear signal to return to those normal functioning levels. And this means it will continue to secrete the stress hormones and your blood pressure will remain high. And lastly, prolonged or chronic stress leads to this phase three of general adaptation syndrome, which is exhaustion. Enduring stresses without any relief will drain your physical, emotional, and mental resources to the point where actually your body's no longer able to cope with stress. And some of the signs that you may experience in that exhaustion phase could include fatigue, burnout, or even a decreased stress tolerance. Now, this general adaptation syndrome is caused by any kind of stressor, both unpleasant and rewarding, dangerous or thrilling. And this really takes you through the physiology of how your body responds to that stressful situation. Now, now that we've understood a little bit about, what stress is, the different types of stress, and what our bodies go through in that gas model, we're going to just move on to looking at the basics of DNA and epigenetics. But if you would like to learn more about that stress response and how you can stress less and live more, I'd highly recommend going back to the YouTube channel, taking a look to February's webinar with Sandeep. But we're going to move now just to have a look at the basics of genes and DNA and looking at how stress can actually impact us on a more molecular level. Now, we're not going to get too heavy in the science for a Tuesday morning, but let's just kick off by having a look at what do we mean by DNA and genes. So DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is a long molecule that we have inherited from both our parents to make up the blueprint of our bodies. And it holds essential information regarding how the body develops, how it functions, and how it grows. DNA is a polymer which is made up of many smaller units joined together. It's made up of two strands which are joined together by hydrogen bonds, and these in turn form that twisted ladder structure called a double helix, which you can see on the screen there. And this helix carries the genetic code which determines the characteristics of a living organism, or what we refer to as the blueprint of our body. From person to person, the majority of our genes are exactly the same, but it's less than 1% difference in our genes that make us all individually unique and holds the secret to our health and well-being. But small changes or mutations to the instructions for the production of proteins may have a beneficial impact, a negative impact, or no impact at all on our current and future health. And although we cannot change our DNA, the activity of the DNA can be influenced by our lifestyle environment. And that's what we're going to just take a little look at now. So if we look at how the activity of the gene is influenced, it's really important here just to stress that the DNA itself doesn't change, but it's the activity of the DNA. And to look at how this occurs, we just need to have a little look at it on that molecular level. Now, as you can see on the screen here, DNA is wrapped around these blue structures that are called histones. And sometimes, if they're wrapped too tightly, a helicase molecule, which copies the DNA, can't get to that specific gene. So in your bottom left-hand image, you'll see that the DNA is wrapped too tightly around the segment of the gene that's needed. And this means that that enzyme helicase can't get to the center of the gene that is needed, so it can't copy it. And this is what we actually refer to as the gene being inactive or the gene being turned off. In the same example on the bottom right, the DNA here is more loosely wound around the histone. So the highlighted area, which you can see on your screen here, is now available to actually split apart, be copied, and then make a new protein. And in that example, that's where we refer to the gene being active or being turned on. So it's the turning on or off of specific genes which dictates whether we might have a greater predisposition or susceptibility to certain diseases. A second common type of modification is called DNA methylation. So we've just had the histone modification and now we're looking at DNA methylation. DNA methylation involves the attachment of a small chemical group called methyl groups, which each consist, as you can see on the screen there, of one carbon atom and three hydrogen atoms, and it joins to DNA building blocks. When methyl groups are present on a gene, that gene is then turned off or inactive, and therefore, like we saw before, no protein is produced from that gene. Now, both histone modification and DNA methylation are discussed a lot in DNA and epigenetics research, and still lots of research needs to be undertaken. But in short, they are two of the key main processes which affect the activity of our DNA. And this actually leads us on to talking about epigenetics. Because epigenetics is the study of how our lifestyle and our surrounding environment influence the behaviour of the genes. So it influences those genes turning on and off. And this might be influenced by what we eat, what we drink, what we do, our environment, including that stress response, and how it turns on or turns off certain genes, just as we looked at in those last couple of slides. Now, I like to think of this mechanism as a series of crossroads. So, for example, imagine a crossroad with traffic lights. If all of the traffic lights are turned to red, yes, it's safe, but it's not functioning at all. You're at a standstill and it's got no purpose. However, when they're all green, it's chaos and you're at risk of accidents. But if we have the right combination of traffic lights turning on and off, then that crossword can work really well. So if you like, epigenetics is the study of how our lifestyle and environment can influence those traffic lights, or in this case, influence how the DNA is turned on and turned off. Now, more specifically, if we just relate this all to stress, exposure to stress can modify DNA methylation and histone modification, and that might alter gene expression and therefore contribute to disease phenotype. So things such as cardiovascular disease, cancers, and even diabetes. And interestingly, early life stress, such as childhood abuse or trauma, or even stress-related disorders, can have lasting effects on methylation that might persist into adulthood. Now, we're going to move on in a second to having a look at ways in which we can mitigate the effects of stress now that we've understood, the impact that it has on our body at a molecular level. But let's just take a quick recap of the science, because that can be a little bit heavy for some of us. So DNA is our blueprint, so it's the blueprint of our body. It holds essential information regarding how we develop, how we function, and how we grow. And whilst we can't change the DNA itself, we can change the activity of the DNA. So we can change the way that different genes are turned on and turned off. And that's influenced by two key mechanisms: histone modification and methylation. And the activity is turned on and off, and it's caused by changes in our lifestyle. So things that we're eating, that we're drinking, our stress, but also the environment around us. And that's termed epigenetics. And it's the epigenetics that helps us to understand how our lifestyle and how our environment impacts our current and our future health. So hopefully that just nicely ties that, stress and DNA connection together for you. But let's have a look at how we can mitigate the effects of stress and actually minimize some of those modifications in that DNA methylation and histone modification that we just looked at. So as you can see here, there are a multitude of different ways in which we can mitigate the effects of stress. Let's just work through each one of those. If we kick off by having a look at our nutrition, it's really important, firstly, that we are eating regularly. Your brain needs glucose to work at its best, so eating regularly throughout the day helps to keep your blood glucose levels stable. And studies have shown that more stable blood sugar levels are associated with better performance. It's also important just to make sure that you've got some healthy snacks nearby as well and throughout the day, particularly if you know that you're going to have a stressful or a busy time approaching. Prepare by stocking up on quick and healthy snacks just to maintain those stable blood sugar levels throughout the day. And healthy snacks are high in protein and fiber. And some examples of those might be granola, almonds, peanuts, carrots with hummus, or maybe even yogurt with some fresh fruit. Get your healthy fats as well. Omega-3 fatty acids, particularly found in walnuts, flaxseed, and fish oil, are associated with brain function, and particularly deficiencies of fatty acids can result in depression and or anxiety. It's important too that you eat your veggies, particularly fruits and vegetables contain vitamins and minerals like copper, zinc, manganese, and vitamins A, E, and C. Particularly leafy greens are especially good for you. And the reason for this is because vitamins and minerals work to neutralize harmful molecules produced when your body is under stress. These sorts of foods are also high in fiber, and high intakes have been associated with greater alertness and also decreased perceived stress. And that kind of takes us back to that general adaptation syndrome that we looked at earlier. So make sure that you're adding in fiber-rich foods such as porridge, oats, nuts, beans, and again, those fruits and vegetables. The last couple of points for nutrition include things like selenium, so making sure you're having plenty of selenium in your diet, which is commonly found in Brazil nuts, oily fish, so things like tuna, mackerel, salmon, and again, those porridge oats, because this has been shown to decrease anxiety and improve mood. And lastly, vitamin D. Vitamin D has been shown to, again, enhance our mood and reduce depression. It's found in those oily fish that I mentioned earlier, as well as red meat and egg yolks. But many foods are also fortified with vitamin D in the UK, such as our cereal. But of course, the best source of vitamin D is being exposed to sunlight. It's certainly sunny where I am today, so where possible, do get yourself out and about in the sunshine, because particularly during those winter months, we all do tend to find that we are a little bit more deficient. So get out in that sunshine as much as possible. If we move on, do be aware of smoking and drinking. Sometimes, these two things are seen as, helping us to relax and switch off, but actually they can place more physical stress and physical strain on the body. Be active as well. Particularly moderate exercise such as jogging or gentle cycling can have positive effects on mood by balancing or kind of burning off those stress hormones within the body. And the more physically active you are, the quicker that will try and reduce the cortisol. But also think about how you can activate what we call our parasympathetic nervous system, and actually that rest and relaxation response by incorporating some more gentle activities such as yoga, Tai Chi, and Pilates, because this is really beneficial to relieving stress. If we move on to the fourth point now, you've probably heard about this word mindfulness. Particularly paying more attention to the present moment, to your own thoughts, your own feelings, and to the world around you can actually improve your mental well-being and help to manage stress. Particularly, mindfulness can help us to enjoy life more and better understand ourselves. And not only can it help with stress, but there are some studies which have shown that it can also help with anxiety and depression. However, it is worth noting that whilst many people find mindfulness helpful, it's not right for everybody. And some people can find that actually, if they are experiencing anxiety and depression, it can actually make them feel worse. So it's worth just being mindful of what works for you. Make sure you're getting enough sleep as well. Unfortunately, when it comes to sleep and stress, it can be a bit of a vicious cycle, particularly if we're having those periods of episodic acute stress, we might find it's impacting on our sleep. But where you can, try and stick to a routine, i.e., sleeping and waking up at the same times every day, because it will help to maintain the timing of your internal clock or our circadian rhythm. Create the right setting as well, so making sure your bedroom is cool, it's dark, it's comfortable. Practice some ways just to help you relax and wind before going to bed. That might be some gentle stretching, like I mentioned earlier with the yoga. It could be some mindfulness or even reading beforehand. And if you can, try and digitally disconnect. And we spend so much time on tablets, mobile phones, TVs, but try and give yourself at least an hour before bed of kind of screen-free time as well. And don't forget about kind of avoiding caffeine and alcohol as well. Caffeine and alcohol, particularly caffeine, will have a half-life of 6 hours, which means it stays in your system for 6 hours after your last cup of caffeine. So try and refrain from having any caffeine really after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And lastly, I know it's probably easier than done, but try and keep things into perspective. This is where, journaling and practicing gratitude can become really, really helpful. And there's a multitude of different mobile phone applications for journaling, or even actual planners that you can buy as well, just to help you look at the bigger picture and keep things in perspective. Now, although we've gone through the ways with which we can mitigate stress, it's important to remember that it is okay to ask for professional help if you are struggling to manage stress on your own. And it's important to get help as soon as possible so that you can begin getting better. Now, the first person that you might approach is your GP. They should be able to give you advice about treatment, and they may refer you to local professionals or even recommend some specialist treatments such as CBT or cognitive behavioural therapy. You can also look at utilising employee assistance programs, but there are also a multitude of different organisations that can help you as well. So there's 5 key ones there on the screen for you to have a little look at. Particularly, over the last few months, it's been really hard going through this financial crisis for many people. So Step Change in particular provides help and information for people dealing with a range of debt problems. But it's worth just being mindful of the different resources that you do have available to you if you're struggling to manage stress on your own. Now, that brings us to a conclusion for today's session. So, a lot that we've gone through today. So, let's just recap on what we've explored. So, we began by having a look at what stress is, and stress is a natural human response that prompts us to address challenges and threats in our lives. And it can trigger those physical, emotional, or psychological strains. And we had a look here that stress is more than just being psychological by exploring the physiology through the general adaptation syndrome model. We then moved on to having a look at how it can impact us from a molecular level, and we saw how that whilst our DNA doesn't change, the activity of our DNA, so the genes that are turning on and turning off, can be influenced by two key mechanisms: histone modification and methylation. And it's the genes turning on and off which is influenced by our lifestyle. In this particular case, it's influenced by our response to stress. And this is something known as epigenetics. And it was really important that we looked at that because stress can alter those genes turning on and off, or alter what we call the gene expression, and therefore increase our risk for disease phenotypes. And we just took a quick look there at some of the strategies to help mitigate and reduce stress. So you might consider looking at your lifestyle, but where you need to, reaching out for that further support, whether it be through GPs or also employee assistance programs as well. Now, thank you as always for joining me on this, well, actually quite sunny Tuesday morning where I am. As always, we do value your feedback. So if you do want to kind of leave us any comments or feedbacks or anything that you'd like to see in these future free sessions, then you can either scan the QR code or the link will be for you within the chat box. And if you're interested in having any of the workshops or webinars for your own employees, then do reach out to us at inquiries@tohealthlimited.co.uk, and don't forget to get social with us. You can find us on all your different social media networks, and also look back, as I mentioned earlier, at some of our previous YouTube videos as well. So have a great day, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you again next month. Thank you.